welcome to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. I'm your host, Louis Padian. I hope that you're doing well and are enjoying the podcast and the topics we've covered so far. These podcasts are released every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening to be kept up to date.
So today we're going to be focusing on how to make a healthier plate. One of the things that we often see when I'm working with people is that people aren't sure how to make a meal, or they've never been taught how to make a meal, and they're looking for ideas, and obviously they get recipes and things like that, but they're just finding their feet really, and they want to improve their health but they're not too sure. And often we'll just talk about the composition of a meal that can be really useful for people and hopefully get them to understand not only what to do but why we're doing it, because there's huge benefits to the things that we're going to talk about today, and that will touch on each individual. But there's also a huge amount of things that we can do. It's not just one or two things, but there's a variety of things that you can pick or choose which one's probably going to work best for you. The first one, that's probably the most obvious, is try to get fruits and vegetables into that meal. If you can get 1 to 2 servings or even fill up half your plate with fruits and vegetables, that can be a huge win for people. It's often one of the things that people often neglect. They're fine with proteins, and we'll talk about protein choices in a second. They'll probably have a carbohydrate source in there. Again, we'll talk about how that can be changed slightly, but they might be falling a bit short on the fruits and veg. And there's huge amount of benefits to fruits and veg, essential vitamins and minerals, huge amount of fiber usually, lowering calories for a huge amount of volume, things like antioxidants in there. And again, can reduce the risk of chronic diseases. So 2019 study found that people who consumed more fruits and vegetables had a lower risk of developing heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes. So if you eat more fruits and veg, you're probably putting yourself in a better position long term for reducing your risk of chronic diseases. And it's a simple win. So having frozen fruits and vegetables within the freezer can be a simple win as well, or just hiding them in there. So blending or dicing up or having finely grated carrots and things like that, or courgettes that don't have a huge amount of flavour but have a good amount of nutrition and a bit more volume to a meal for less calories. All these things can be improved just by adding some fruits and vegetables to your meal. So that's often the first thing that we might discuss. Second is potentially having a look at whole grains versus refined grains. So whole grains provide, again, fiber, vitamins and minerals, but again, we might not absorb all the calories potentially in a whole grain. We might feel a bit more full because of the higher fiber content. And just having more whole grains in your diet in general, and I'll probably do a whole episode on all the benefits of whole grains in the future, is going to benefit people long term. We know it's a huge part of the Mediterranean diet as well, which is probably one of the healthiest diets out there. Again, when we're looking at people who live the longest and regards to cardiovascular disease, whole grains play a key role in that. So 2018 study found that replacing refined grains with whole grains reduced risk of type 2 diabetes by 36%, which is massive. So just making that simple swap in there and trying to embrace more whole grains in your diet, regardless, like if we're looking at pasta, we're looking at bread, we're looking at rice, it can be a simple win that can have a huge benefit to people's health and well-being long term. Next up is include lean protein sources. So when we're talking about protein sources, we'd say things like fish, poultry, beans, lentils, tofu, and these are the things that have the amino acids in that. Again, good for repairing tissues, helping muscle mass, but also helping with fullness and satiety. The reason we say lean protein sources is we want to reduce the amount of saturated fat usually within the diet. Dairy is a slightly grey area, but when we're looking at protein sources such as your red meats, maybe not fish, because oily fish is a huge beneficial with omega-3s, but poultry and red meats, trying to reduce the fat content within those meals if we can. I'm not saying always go for the leanest one like a chicken breast, because chicken thighs can be really delicious and a bit more benefits with regards to texture and taste. But if we're looking at calories, we're looking at health outcomes long term, then we're trying to benefit people we're trying to improve our diet, I should say, by having leaner sources of protein. Sometimes one of the things that people are missing from their meals is a protein source as well. Often one of the things they're missing, breakfast can be protein. So having protein 3 to 5 servings throughout the day, trying to get fistful as a good sort of a representation, is trying to get your fist size portion in each meal, can be a really good way to improve the satiety, that satisfaction from that meal, but also the feeling of fullness as well. And we know that's going to improve people's maintenance of muscle mass long term. So huge benefits to protein. 2021 study found that individuals who consumed more protein had a lower risk of type 2 diabetes. So again, linking with the reduction of chronic diseases. But what we're trying to do is improve people's healthy aging as well, and protein is a big part of that. Next up is limiting saturated and trans fats. So we've done episodes on the fats, and if you haven't listened to those, I highly recommend, because there's a lot of confusion around it. But in essence, trans fats can increase, saturated and trans fats, should say, increase your bad cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol, and raise the risk of heart disease and stroke. Trans fats as well have been linked with certain types of cancer. So again, trying to stay clear of trans fats as well. And replacing those saturated fats with polyunsaturated fats reduce the risk of heart disease by 30%. Heart disease is the biggest killer worldwide. So simple thing, by reducing the amount of saturated fat, so again, cutting the solid fat, and what we said when we talk about saturated versus unsaturated fats, at room temperature, saturated fats tend to be hard or solid, and unsaturated fats tend to be a liquid. So replacing that fat from the meal, so if we've got a piece of pork, cutting off the visible fat from the edge and adding a drizzle of olive oil to the meal at the end could be a good swap in there to get a polyunsaturated fat for a saturated fat. And again, it can have huge benefits to people's health long term, but fat shouldn't be feared. As if you listened to the episode previously, it's not something that I tell people to avoid, because it adds a huge amount of diversity to a meal, but it's also very calorie dense, and the type of fat can have a big impact on health outcomes long term. Number 5, and this is sort of on a similar note, but opting for healthier fats. So trying to add things like nuts, seeds, olive oil, avocados to meals, improve heart outcomes long term, cognitive function as well. And this is where that Mediterranean style diet comes in. Having a diet rich in polyunsaturated fats and monounsaturated fats has been shown to reduce the risk of heart disease massively by up to 32% by a 2020 study. So again, trying to increase the amount of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats by getting things in like your oily fish, avocados, nuts and seeds. Not only the health outcomes, but again, the textures and tastes, the creaminess of the avocados, the crunchiness of nuts and seeds. The olive oil adds that sort of oiliness to a meal and really brings out the flavour. Just huge benefits to creating that healthy plate, and can be an option people add in as they move forward. Next on the list, and this is something that's often neglected, and this is herbs, spices. They can be massive in transforming meals. If we take vegetables, for example, having them boiled is often how people remember them as a kid, and that's why they don't tend to like veg. But if you season it, if you add some salts to it and some herbs and spices, or like a spicy seasoning, and then roast them in the oven, for example, broccoli, it's completely different food to the one that you get boiled broccoli. Just completely transforms it. Again, we're changing the cooking method in there, maybe adding a drizzle of oil on there as well, but it's a lot more appetizing for people, and people are more likely to eat it more often if it's more appetizing. So again, trying to add herbs and spices to your food can have a huge benefit to people making pretty healthy and quote unquote boring meals a lot more flavorful, a lot more rich in textures, tastes as well. So some of them might have some health benefits associated with them. We won't go into that because, again, that might deserve its own episode. But just talking from the enjoyment factor, that could be a huge win for people by learning to how to season food. Things like meat as well. A big one for me in the last couple of years. Seasoning your steak, salt and pepper, again, brings out a huge amount of flavour, and learn how to cook it properly, and watching videos online how to change your meals slightly to add a lot more flavour and texture and taste to them, again, makes a more nutritious diet a lot more easy. Last but not least is be more mindful and self-aware around your foods. And this is often something that I work on a lot with patients and clients as well, is being more aware of the sights, smells, tastes and textures of your food, slowing down and savouring each bite and having those moments and focusing on each bite. Again, this helps us manage our portion control, promotes us satiety and feeling more full, but improves overall eating habits as well, those mindful meals. So it might be focusing on the food before it even goes into your mouth, and this might be the first thing that I work on with some clients who want to improve their relationship with food, is they might have a certain trigger food, they might have a food that's a bit safer quote unquote, where they don't feel the need to eat it all in one go and eat it all in. So if it's chocolate, for example, it might not be that, but we might focus on, right, so before we even eat it, just sit on the plate and smell it and see what it smells like and take that smell in. We might even get them to play with it in between their fingers to notice how the texture feels, but how it might change as well. And then they might just rub it on their lips to feel it there and getting a real good sensory process into this. And this is getting people to really focus on the food. Often one of the problems that people might feel around these trigger foods like chocolate, for example, is they feel the need to get it out of the house. So they'll get the whole family-sized bar of chocolate and eat it all in one go, feel guilty and shameful afterwards, and they haven't even enjoyed it. That's the worst bit. We want these foods to be enjoyed, and it can add a huge amount to a meal just by slowing down. And in the previous episodes, we spoke about eating seated, eating socially, and eating slowly to make meals more mindful, because that seated allows us to focus on the food. Socially allows us to discuss the food, but also have that conversation where we stop eating and it makes the meal last a bit longer, which makes us slow down. And slowly to try and focus on the meal, try and focus on the mouthful each time that we're eating, rather than trying to get it down as quickly as possible. So 2022 study found that mindful eating training reduced emotional eating and overeating and improved body image in college students. So again, huge wins. It's not just about the food though, it improves so many aspects as well. And a lot of these things that we focus on around food, it's not just, well, X or A equals B. Actually, it has this ripple effect into other things, and you don't have to do all of these from the get-go. As in previous episodes, just pick one and focus on it for a little bit. So it could be a focus on seasoning your food and find different ways to season your food. It could be, right, I'm going to focus on trying to get leaner sources of protein in. It could be that I'm trying to get more monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats into my diet, or more fruits and vegetables into my diet. And trying to get more consistent with these habits and behaviors to build a healthier meal will lead to phenomenal health results long term, but also more food enjoyment, and hopefully be a lot easier than just trying to change your diet all in one go, trying to go from 0 to 60, which we've all tried in the past and doesn't really work. So try one of these 7 tactics to improve your meal and slowly introduce more and more, and it will massively improve the outcomes long term.
So there you have it. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. If you have any questions, queries, or would like to reach out to me, please do. I am at Louis Padian Nutrition, which is at LOUISPADIAN Nutrition on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all other social media platforms. If you're looking for support in achieving your goals and living a healthier, happier, and more balanced life in the process, click the link below and inquire about working with me. Remember to subscribe to the Balanced Approach podcast wherever you're listening for more insightful episodes, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.